Emma stood at the rusty gate of her grandmother's old house. Her breath made small white clouds in the cold December air. The winter wind was very cold and went right through her thin coat. She held the key her mother had given her with shaking hands. It had been 3 long months since Grandma Rose had died. Emma was finally ready to go inside and face all the memories. The small cottage felt so empty and cold when Emma walked in. She wrapped her arms round herself to stay warm. She moved slowly through the quiet rooms. Every single thing in the house reminded her of the wonderful woman who had taken care of her. Grandma Rose had raised Emma after her parents died in a terrible car accident when Emma was only 7 years old. Now Emma was 25 years old and felt completely alone in the world. Emma walked through the small house, touching things that belonged to her grandmother. There was the old rocking chair where Grandma Rose used to sit and tell stories. There was the kitchen table where they ate breakfast together every morning. There were pictures on the walls of Emma growing up. Each room held so many happy memories. But now they made Emma feel sad and lonely. After looking round the house for a while, Emma decided to see the back garden. She remembered how much her grandmother loved the garden. Emma opened the back door and took a step outside. Then she stopped and gasped. She could not believe what she saw. The garden that had once been Grandma Rose's pride and joy was covered in thick white snow. Everything looked completely dead. Brown. Frozen plant stems poked up through the white blanket like broken dreams. The garden looked nothing like Emma remembered it. She thought about the summer days when this same garden had been full of bright colors and life. There had been red roses, yellow sunflowers, purple violets, and green grass everywhere. Now it all looked dead and forgotten. Emma felt tears coming to her eyes. Even the garden missed Grandma Rose. She walked carefully through the deep snow, trying not to slip and fall. Her feet were getting cold and wet, but she kept walking. Near the center of the garden, she found an old wooden bench. It was the same bench where she and her grandmother used to sit together on warm summer evenings. Emma brushed the snow off the bench with her cold hands and sat down. She looked round the dead garden and felt so sad. Everything that had been beautiful was now gone. Just like her grandmother, just like her parents. Emma felt like she was always losing the people she loved most. But then something caught her eye. There, against the back fence of the garden, stood a single rose bush. Its branches were completely bare and looked lifeless, just like all the other dead plants. But something about this rose bush seemed different. Emma could not explain what it was, but she felt like this plant was special somehow. Emma got up from the bench and walked over to the rose bush. The snow was deeper here and came up to her knees. She knelt down beside the bush and looked at it closely. The branches were dark brown and had no leaves at all, but they seemed strong. Not broken like the other plants. As Emma knelt there in the snow, she saw something hidden under a pile of old brown leaves at the base of the rose bush. She carefully moved the leaves away with her cold hands. There, buried under the leaves, was a small leather journal. Emma picked it up and felt her heart jump with excitement. She recognized the handwriting on the cover right away. It was her grandmother's beautiful writing. The cover said Rose's Garden Wisdom in faded ink. Emma held the journal close to her chest. It felt like finding a piece of her grandmother that was still alive. Emma opened the journal with shaking hands. She was so cold that she could barely turn the pages. The first page had a message written just for her. It said, "My dear Emma, gardens teach us that even in the darkest winter, life is preparing to return. Sometimes we must have faith in what we cannot see." When Emma read these words, tears began to roll down her cold cheeks. They were exactly the kind of words her grandmother would say. Grandma Rose always believed that good things would happen. Even when times were hard, She always said that after every winter came spring. She always said that after every dark night came morning. Emma sat there in the snow next to the bare rose bush. Holding her grandmother's journal, the old rose bush stood silent beside her. Its bare branches reached up toward the grey winter sky like arms asking for help. Emma looked at the bush and felt something she had not felt in months. She felt hope. Emma did not know it yet, but finding this journal would change her whole life. She did not know that this moment would be the beginning of something beautiful and amazing. She only knew that for the first time since her grandmother died, she felt like maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. The wind blew softly through the dead garden, and Emma held the journal tight. Winter was all round her, but spring was coming. Emma woke up early the next morning feeling excited for the first time in months. She made herself a hot cup of tea and sat by the fireplace with her grandmother's journal. The leather cover felt warm in her hands as she opened it carefully. Page after page was filled with her grandmother's neat handwriting. There were gardening tips about when to plant seeds and how to care for roses. But there were also beautiful life lessons mixed in with the garden advice. Emma read about patience and hope. She read about never giving up even when things seemed impossible. The more she read, the more determined she became to bring the dead garden back to life. Even in the middle of December, one page said a garden is like the human heart. Both can look dead on the outside, but life is always waiting underneath, ready to grow again. Another page said winter teaches us that sometimes we must rest before we can bloom. Emma felt like her grandmother was talking directly to her through these words. After reading for 2 hours, Emma knew what she had to do. She put on her warmest clothes, thick boots, a heavy coat, warm gloves, and a wool hat. She was going to start working on the garden today, no matter how cold it was outside. First, Emma decided to go to the local garden center to buy some tools. The shop was warm and smelled like fresh soil and flowers. The owner, Mr. William, was a kind man with grey hair and gentle eyes. He had known her grandmother very well. They used to talk about flowers and plants for hours. When Mr. William saw Emma, his face lit up with a sad but warm smile. "Emma, dear," he said softly, "I was so sorry to hear about your grandmother. She was a wonderful woman who loved her garden more than anything." Emma told Mr. William about finding the journal and her plan to bring the garden back to life. She expected him to be excited and helpful. Instead, his face became worried. "Emma, dear," he said very gently, "I understand you want to honor your grandmother's memory. That's a beautiful thing to want to do, but you can't grow anything in December. The ground is frozen solid like a rock. Nothing will survive this cold weather. You will only hurt yourself trying." Emma felt disappointed, but she was not ready to give up. She bought some basic gardening tools anyway, a small shovel, some plant food, and warm gloves made for garden work. Mr. William shook his head sadly as she paid for everything. When Emma got home, she went straight to the backyard and started working. She began by carefully clearing the snow away from around the old rosebush. The snow was deep and heavy, and her back started to hurt from bending over so much. Mrs. Margaret, who lived in the house next door, saw Emma working and came over too. The fence. Mrs. Margaret was an older woman with silver hair who had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years. She had always been nice to Emma and her grandmother. "Sweet child," Mrs. Margaret called out, "what are you doing out there in this cold weather? You're going to catch pneumonia." Emma explained her plan to bring the garden back to life. Mrs. Margaret's face became sad and worried, just like Mr. Williams had been. "Oh, dear," Mrs. Margaret said. shaking her head. "You're wasting your time and energy. Nothing can grow in weather this cold. The ground is frozen like concrete. Wait until spring comes. That's what sensible people do. Your grandmother would not want you to make yourself sick over this." Emma felt her heart sink a little more, but she kept working. Her hands were getting red and numb from the cold, even with the warm gloves on. That evening, Emma's best friend Lucy came to visit. Lucy was the same age as Emma, and had been her friend since they were children. Lucy had loved Grandma Rooster and was very sad when she died. Lucy found Emma reading the journal by the fireplace again. When Emma told her about the garden plan, Lucy sat down next to her on the couch. "Emma," Lucy said in a worried voice, "I know you miss her terribly. I miss her too, but this won't bring Grandma Rose back. You're just setting yourself up for disappointment and sadness. Nothing good can come from this. Please don't do this to yourself." Emma felt tears coming to her eyes. Everyone she cared about was telling her to give up. Everyone thought her plan was foolish and impossible. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was being silly and unrealistic. But then Emma read another entry in her grandmother's journal that made her heart feel strong again. It said the most beautiful roses aren't the ones that had easy lives. They're the ones that learned to bloom despite the storms and cold winds. Emma closed the journal and made a decision. She would not give up, no matter what anyone said. The next day, Emma went back to the frozen garden with her new tools. She worked for hours, clearing more snow and trying to prepare the hard, frozen soil. Her whole body was cold and tired, but she kept working. People walking by on the street would stop and look at her strangely. Some would shake their heads and whisper to each other. Emma heard one person say, "Poor girl has lost her mind along with her grandmother." But Emma remembered something else Grandma Rose used to say. "Sometimes, my dear, you have to believe in miracles before you can see them." Emma decided to believe in miracles. 3 long weeks had passed since Emma started working in her grandmother's frozen garden. Every single morning, she would wake up early and put on her warmest clothes. She wore thick wool socks, heavy boots, 2 sweaters, a big coat, warm gloves, and a hat that covered her ears. Then she would go outside into the cold and spend hours working round the old rose bush. The work was very hard. The ground was frozen like stone and difficult to dig. The cold wind made her face red and her fingers numb. Even with gloves on, sometimes snow would fall while she was working, covering up all the progress she had made the day before. But Emma never gave up. She would just start over again. Her friends and neighbors still thought she was wasting her time. They would see her outside in the freezing cold every morning and shake their heads. Some people felt sorry for her, others thought she was being foolish. But Emma did not care what anyone else thought. She had made a promise to herself and to her grandmother's memory. Every evening, Emma would come inside with cold, tired hands and read more from her grandmother's journal. The pages gave her strength to keep going. One page said patience is the gardener's greatest tool. Seeds know when it is time to grow. Another page said never judge a garden by its winter appearance. The most beautiful blooms are worth waiting for. Then, on a very cold January morning, something absolutely amazing happened. Emma was doing her usual morning work, clearing fresh snow that had fallen during the night from round the rose bush. She was using her small shovel to move the heavy, wet snow when she saw something that made her heart stop. There, pushing up through the dark, cold soil, was a tiny bright green shoot. It was no bigger than Emma's little finger, but it was definitely alive and growing. Emma dropped her shovel and knelt down in the snow to look more closely. She could hardly believe her eyes. "It's working," she whispered to herself. her voice shaking with excitement. Tears of pure joy filled her eyes and rolled down her cold cheeks. "It's actually working." Emma stayed kneeling in the snow for a long time, just looking at the tiny, green shoot. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, after weeks of everyone telling her she was crazy, after weeks of frozen ground and numb fingers and aching back. Finally, there was proof that she was right. Life was coming back. To the garden, word about Emma's impossible garden began to spread through the small town very quickly. People loved to talk about unusual things, and a garden growing in the middle of winter was definitely unusual. People would walk by Emma's house more slowly than before, trying to get a better look over the fence. Most of them still shook their heads in disbelief, but some began to show real curiosity and interest. Children would press their faces against the fence and ask their parents questions. "Why is that lady digging in the snow?" they would ask. "Can flowers really grow in winter?" Some parents would just hurry their children along, but others would stop and look too. One afternoon, while Emma was carefully watering the tiny green shoots that had appeared, she heard someone clearing their throat behind her. She turned round and saw an elderly man standing at her garden gate. He had very kind blue eyes and walked with a beautiful wooden cane. His grey hair was neat and he wore a warm wool coat. "Excuse me, miss," he said very politely. "I hope I'm not bothering you. My name is Henry. I live in the blue house down the street. I knew your grandmother quite well." Emma's face lit up with a warm smile. She was always happy to meet people who had known and loved her grandmother. She walked over to the gate and opened it wide. "Please come in," Emma said. "I'm Emma. I'd love to hear about my grandmother." Henry walked slowly into the garden, using his cane to help him balance on the snowy ground. When he saw the small green shoots growing round the rose bush, his kind eyes filled with wonder and amazement. "My goodness," he said softly. "It's really true. Plants are actually growing here in January." Emma showed Henry all the tiny shoots that had appeared over the past few days. There were now 7 small green plants poking up through the soil. Henry looked at each one carefully, as if he was looking at precious jewels. "Your grandmother was a very special woman," Henry said, his voice gentle and full of memories. "She helped me through some of the darkest times of my life after my dear wife died 5 years ago. I was so sad and lonely that I didn't want to go on living, but your grandmother would bring me soup and sit with me for hours. She would tell me stories about her garden and about you." Emma felt warm inside despite the cold air. She loved hearing stories about her grandmother. Henry continued. "She always said that hope was like a seed. It might look completely dead on the surface, but underneath, life was always preparing to return. She said that even in the middle of winter, spring was already planning its arrival." From that day on, Henry visited the garden every single afternoon. He would bring him a hot tea in a thermos to keep her warm while she worked. He would help her build small shelters round the growing shoots to protect them from the harsh wind and snow. By the time February arrived, Emma's garden had become the most talked about place in the entire town. What had started as whispers of doubt and people thinking Emma was crazy had completely changed it. Oh, amazement and wonder! More bright green shoots appeared in the garden every single week. Some of the plants even had tiny flower buds starting to form. People began stopping by regularly to see what they were now calling the miracle garden. The most regular visitor was 8-year-old Thomas, who lived in the house right next door with his mother Anna. Thomas had been very sad for the past 6 months since his father had left them and moved far away. The little boy rarely smiled anymore and spent most of his time alone in his room. But every day after school, Thomas would run to the fence that separated his yard from Emma's garden. He would press his small face against the cold metal fence and watch Emma work with fascination. Thomas's eyes would light up with excitement whenever he saw new green growth appearing in the garden. He would count the new shoots each day and get excited when he found ones that hadn't been there before. Emma noticed the little boy watching her every afternoon, and it made her heart feel warm to see how much joy the garden brought him. One cold February afternoon, while Emma was carefully tending to a group of small plants, Thomas gathered up his courage and called out to her. "Excuse me," Thomas said in his small, shy voice. "Can I help you with your garden? I promise I'll be very careful, and I won't break anything." Emma looked at the hopeful expression on Thomas's face and felt her heart melt. She walked over to the fence and smiled at the little boy. "Of course you can help," Emma said warmly, opening the garden gate wide. "Gardens always grew better when people work together. That's what my grandmother used to say." Thomas's whole face lit up with the biggest smile Emma had seen from him. He ran into the garden eagerly, ready to help with whatever Emma needed him to do. Anna, Thomas's mother, was watching from her kitchen window. At first she felt worried about letting her son play in someone else's garden. But when she saw Thomas laughing and smiling for the first time in many months, she decided to let him help. The next day, Anna found herself walking over to the garden too. She wanted to thank Emma for being so kind to her son. But something magical happened when Anna started talking to Emma. She found the quiet garden work very peaceful and relaxing. The gentle conversations with Emma helped Anna feel less lonely and sad. Soon, Anna was coming to the garden every day after work, bringing hot chocolate for everyone and helping with the gardening tasks. Word about the amazing garden continued to spread throughout the whole town. Mrs. Margaret, who had been so doubtful and worried about Emma in the beginning, felt embarrassed about the things she had said. She started bringing Emma big containers of homemade soup to keep her warm, while she worked outside in the cold weather. "I'm sorry I doubted you, dear," Mrs. Margaret said one day. "I should have known that if you're anything like your grandmother, you could make miracles happen." Even Mr. William from the garden center changed his mind completely. He had never seen anything like plants growing so well in the middle of winter. He was so impressed that he started donating gardening tools and plant supplies to Emma for free. He wanted to help support the miracle garden in any way he could. The local elementary school teacher, Miss Clare, heard about the unusual garden and thought it would be perfect for teaching her students about science and nature. She brought her whole class of 25 children to see the garden as part of their weekly science lesson. The children were absolutely amazed that plants could grow and thrive in cold winter weather. Emma loved having the children visit. She told them all the wonderful stories that Grandma Rose used to tell her about patience and faith and never giving up. She taught them about how plants grow and how to take care of living things. Sometimes, Emma explained to the wide-eyed children, the most important growth happens underground, where we can't see it. The roots get strong and prepare for spring even when everything looks dead on top. Just like people, we're always growing and changing and getting stronger. Even during our hardest and saddest times, the children asked many questions and wanted to touch the plants gently. They promised to come back and visit the garden again. Soon, as the weeks went by, Emma began to realize something very important. The garden was becoming much more than just a place where plants grew. It was becoming a special place where the whole community came together. People would share their problems and struggles while they worked in the peaceful garden. They would find hope and comfort in each other's company. Young mothers would bring their babies and talk about the challenges of raising children. Older people would share stories about their lives and give advice to younger visitors, teenagers. would come after school to help water plants and talk about their dreams for the future. Emma finally understood something that had taken her months to learn. Her grandmother's true gift had never been just about gardening and growing plants. Grandma Rose's real talent was bringing people together and helping them believe that better days were always ahead, no matter how difficult things seemed right. Now, the garden was bringing the whole community together, just like Grandma Rose had always done when she was alive. 11 whole months had passed since Emma first found her grandmother's special journal hidden under the leaves by the old rosebush. It was hard to believe how much time had gone by and how much everything had changed. December had come down again, bringing cold winter weather and snow just like the year before. But this time, everything was completely different. The garden was now a beautiful space filled with winter plants, evergreen trees, and carefully tended flower beds. The whole community had worked together to help transform the once dead garden into something truly magical. There were stone pathways, wooden benches for sitting, and small shelters to protect the plants from harsh weather. People had donated money, time, and materials to make the garden a special place for everyone to enjoy. Throughout the year, Emma had watched many wonderful things grow in the garden. There had been spring flowers, summer vegetables, autumn colors, and now winter evergreens. Every season had brought new life and beauty. The community had celebrated each new bloom and each successful harvest together. But there was one thing that had never changed. The original rosebush, the very same one that had started Emma's whole journey, remained completely bare. Its dark branches reached toward the sky with no leaves and no flowers, just as they had been when Emma first found them a year ago. The rose bush looked exactly the same as it had in that first cold December. Emma had never lost faith in the old rose bush, but as Christmas got closer and closer, she began to wonder if it would ever bloom again. She had read every page of her grandmother's journal many times, looking for clues about when the rose might flower, but the journal gave no clearances about timing. It only talked about patience and faith and trusting that good things would happen when the time was right. Every morning for the past 11 months, Emma had walked out to the garden with her cup of hot tea to check on all the plants. She would water them, clear away dead leaves, and talk to them softly. The rose bush always got special attention. Emma would touch its bare branches gently and whisper encouraging words to it, hoping that somehow it could hear her. On Christmas Eve morning, fresh white snow was falling very gently on the garden, covering everything with a clean, soft blanket. Emma put on her warm robe and boots and walked outside with her steaming cup of morning tea, just as she did every single day. The air was crisp and cold, and her breath made small white clouds as she walked along the stone path. Emma made her way to the back corner of the garden, where the old rose bush stood against the fence. She expected to see the same bare, dark branches that she had been looking at for almost a year, but when she got close enough to see clearly, she stopped walking and gasped so loudly that she almost dropped her teacup. There, on the very highest branch of the old rose bush, was a single perfect red rose. It was the most incredible thing Emma had ever seen in her entire life. The bright red flower stood out like a jewel against the white snow and dark branches. The rose was full and perfect, with soft, delicate petals that seemed to glow in the grey morning light. Emma's hands began to shake as she reached out very carefully to touch the soft petals. They felt like silk under her cold fingers. It was absolutely the most beautiful rose she had ever seen in her life, and it was blooming impossibly in the middle of December snow. The sight was so amazing and unexpected that Emma felt her knees become weak. She knelt down in the cold, wet Snow right there beside the rose bush and began to cry. But these were not sad tears like she had cried so many times before. These were tears of pure joy and gratitude, after 11 long months of waiting and hoping and believing. The miracle had finally happened. Emma stayed kneeling in the snow for a long time, just looking at the beautiful December rose and thinking about her grandmother. She felt like Grandma Rose was right there with her, smiling and proud of everything Emma had accomplished. Within just a few hours, word about the Christmas miracle had spread throughout the entire town. The whole neighborhood gathered in Emma's garden to see the amazing December rose with their own eyes. Henry, who had become such a good friend over the past year, brought his camera to take pictures of the special moment. Little Thomas and his mother Anna brought big containers of hot chocolate for everyone to share. Even people from other parts of town who had heard the news came to witness the incredible Christmas rose. Mrs. Margaret stood near the rose bush with tears rolling down her cheeks. "It's a sign from heaven," she whispered to everyone round her. "This proves that hope can bloom anywhere, any time, no matter how impossible things seem." Emma stood in front of the crowd of neighbors and friends, holding her grandmother's precious journal close to her heart. She looked at all the faces round her, people who had become like family to her over the past year. "My grandmother taught me that the most beautiful things in life often come from the most difficult times," Emma said in a clear, strong voice. "This garden has shown all of us that with patience, faith, and community working together, miracles can happen even in our darkest seasons." The end.